I love the song. I'm going to declare it. I love it. It's a great song. Thrill of it all. It's Bearer. You're listening, of course, to the Social Impact Show with me, Samm Marshall. Mondays to Fridays, what we get to do, I think we've got the greatest job in the world. We get to chat to amazing South Africans who are focused on building brand South Africa. And what we do Mondays to Fridays between 9 to 12 in your company, and we appreciate you deeply for joining us, is that we get to focus on only the positive stories in South Africa. We don't do crime, we don't do murder, we don't do rape. That can be left for all the other platforms. But here, it's about driving brand South Africa forward, and that's what we get to do 3 hours. Can you imagine the day we have afterwards? 3 hours jam-packed with inspirational individuals. And joining me in studio now, because the Loeries, I don't know if you know this, we all know the Loeries. I think the Loeries is probably as famous as Cool Baked Beans, right? It's been around forever, it's done its work, it's recognized amazing creativity, but it's 47 years old this year. And in studio with me now, leading that team, leading this creative vision, not only for organizations, institutions, brand, and South Africa, is Preetesh Sewraj, who is the CEO of the Loeries. Preetesh, good morning and thank you for joining me.
Good morning, Sam. Thanks for having me on.
47 years. Obviously, I know for a fact that you were not the CEO for 47 years.
Yeah.
But as somebody who kind of thinks of the industry in that context and this body recognizing the bodies of work, the individuals, organizations, institutions, how do you reflect kind of storytelling and brand building?
Yeah, and when I reflect on it and looking at the Loeries history, we have this amazing kind of history of the South African landscape first, and now we also have included the global landscape, including Africa and the Middle East. But we started in 1978. It was a very different time. The reason we started was because there was this amazing new technology that just come out. No one was using it. It was called television. and it was designed.
I was alive. I was alive then. Okay.
I was born after that, to be honest. And anyway, so it was actually used to stimulate television advertising stuff. So what actually happens right now is when we reflect on the creativity, as you asked, you actually look at it and it's almost like these little rings on a tree. You look at it and you can actually go back in our archives and look at it and actually see the development of advertising, communication, and the way brands communicate with us as consumers.
Yeah. You know what I love about leadership? Depending on how vibrant leadership is, it either brings in immediate change or there's at least some reflection on how, because every leader brings a new perspective. Every leader has a different vision. Sometimes they come in and they build on other visions, or sometimes they come and they dismantle and they tear it down. For example, in what's happened in America, Trump has come down and has broken everything apart, what he didn't like, and Biden was kind of building up on things, and so was Barack Obama. From a creativity perspective and how you reflect on the last spell, what kind of leader are you? Do you think that there was stuff that, I mean, let me be frank, the industry has always battled, we need to include more women. There needs to be younger people. We need to be more diverse in how we grow the industry. We need to kind of dismantle structures that have been around. And I mean, if you talk about 1978, there's a lot of good things and a lot of bad things that's dragged through the kind of the hallways of the offices. How do you see your tenure as a leader? Is to kind of dismantle or to kind of build?
A little bit different. Mine was to give away.
Okay, give away.
Yeah. So when I came in, I went and my immediate reaction is I looked at Loeries and I went we need to give this back to the industry, give it back to the people.
That's interesting. Okay.
So what we did was
the people?
The people of the industry.
Okay.
So the brand communications industry, because the people who are actually going about and making the work, who are entering to Loeries and who we actually reward, are the ones that I want to feel a sense of ownership. And I think
there wasn't that. But before?
I mean, I think there was a sense of ownership, but it wasn't one where they explicitly were told, by the way, this belongs to you. Because that's what we are. We are a non-profit organization as the Loeries, and we belong to the industry itself. But people didn't know this. I always had people going, who owns Loeries? And I went, you do. Okay. And having all of these conversations. And so then I started to go okay, I'm going to walk into rooms right now, and whenever I do my presentations, I go who owns the Loeries? And you'd have silence. And then I'd say, you do.
Yeah.
And then people, it would sync with people, and then they started going, ooh, if I own it, I can come forward. I can share more about what's bugging me about the industry, things I want to change, things I want to uplift. And you tend to find that all of this dialogue, I spent a lot of time speaking to people in this process of giving it back, is what's actually happened to actually create and transform the Loeries into the body that it is today.
That's very, very interesting. Because I think sometimes we think there's one or two options, but I love the idea of giving it back. When you walk in and say, well, you own it, I'm giving it back, what's the rest of the team going, yes? Or are you going, maybe we have to educate some of the stalwarts that have been around for a bit longer, who've somehow elevated this brand and institution above the industry. And you're saying, no, in actual fact, we're part of the industry. It belongs to everybody. And if it belongs to everybody, everybody has a sense of ownership. And if everybody has a sense of ownership, they can feed back into it, and it becomes this beautiful organic loop where what we are doing is always current because we are constantly getting feedback.
Yeah, I think it comes down to strategy, right? If you have a sound strategy in terms of what you're trying to do, then all of the execution actually falls into place. And this is one of the things we spoke with our board. We have an amazing board of volunteers who support the Loeries and a wider committee as well. And as we actually went through the programs and showed them how we're giving it back, they absolutely loved it, and they loved the idea, and they continue supporting it to this day.
How do you see storytelling and building brand South Africa? We now know there are many narratives currently floating about, right? I was saying, not to make this conversation political, but it's just top of mind. I'm coming into studio and driving past the American embassy, and there's this long line of white people, right? This is on the back of Trump saying, come to America because of this, whatever the narrative has been fed while he's eating McDonald's. But the point of the matter is, then we have 2-3 weeks before that, we've got the president in Davos talking about South Africa. He does a nice Q&A session, and he's talking about ready for investment. We have Sona a couple of days ago. It was a bit of a snooze fest. Went on for too long, but it literally kind of talking good stories to tell, all of that. But from your perspective, how do we look at creativity, brand storytelling in building South Africa as this dynamic? Yes, often we have challenges, but every country in the world has challenges. How do we use creativity and storytelling to build the brand?
Yeah, I think if you look at it, and using the example you mentioned, there's two key primary layers we need to look at. There's the political layer and the political stories, and then there's a people layer and the people stories. Where we focus on is in the people layer and the people stories. And that is obviously integrated with brands. We sit here today and you look around us in the studio, there are so many different brands surrounding us at every point. They're integral to our life. And therefore, one of the things that resonates with us is when these brands tell us stories that are actually a true reflection of our lived experience, we love it. And sometimes what we want is the brands to tell us stories that are not necessarily a reflection of our lived experience, but a reflection of where we can actually go, that positive kind of story as well. And through these various layers of storytelling, one of the things that we do is we uplift society. And that's what's happening to the brand communications industry. There's no brand coming there and trying to tear you down. There's no brand coming out there and trying to tell you you're not worthy enough. The brands are coming and saying, you're worthy. This is how you can improve your life. This is how you can do things differently. And I think, therefore, this industry plays such an important role in terms of transforming society, uplifting us. And, we cover the whole of Africa, Middle East. So across Africa and the Middle East, you see brands really ensuring that the stories of the people in each individual region is uplifted and being shared in a way that we can all appreciate each other, appreciate our lived experience.
It's quite interesting for me because, I didn't want to join the EFF when they ran into H&M, right? Destroying the brand, right? And Tresemme and all that. So one of the big things I always consider is that I don't think people know that behind some of these brands are serious individuals that actually care about the communities, right? And sometimes the kind of public-facing campaigns sometimes I think misaligns the people that care in the office and kind of what's put out in public. Do you think, or do you find that the Loeries has had to do a lot of work in getting people to understand that brands are actually people and they're not this monolithic kind of behind the scenes Scrooge McDuck who's thinking let's kind of unearth as much as we can and then kind of move off? Because I think sometimes the relationship between brands and the public haven't always been harmonious, because I think sometimes, and we've seen it in America with Budweiser, we've seen it here with lots of well-known brands. They pull in, they come out, they ad campaign is wrong, they use one wrong word, maybe they're not aware of kind of how the political winds have shifted, and so sometimes they get it wrong. But I just thought about your reflection when you talk about brands, and I think, do you think the Loeries has done enough to get people to understand brands are people and they're just not kind of a
this
system, a
monolith.
structure.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, one of the things we always speak about and share with all of our interactions such as this is highlighting the fact that, when you look at the brand, you look at it and you think of a monolith. But in actual fact, behind the brands is multicultural groups of individuals who are there pushing their brand forward, hoping that this brand's going to add value into the lives of the consumers and the communities which they serve itself. And obviously, we share this in different platforms. It lands with consumers. I think there's no consumer out now who looks at the brand and goes, oh, it's just the brand. They look at it and go, oh yeah, there's good people working behind it. There's the people in production, if it's a physical product. There's people in the production who are actually making it. There are people in sales teams. There are people in marketing. There's in HR teams. And then you have the creative teams behind it. So I think a lot of people understand for a brand to come together, they say it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to raise a brand. And you have lots of people behind the brand who are doing this. And I think savvy consumers absolutely understand this.
How do we, in the world of something very interesting on the 28th of January happened? You had Catherine Leavitt, right, the youngest spokesperson in the White House, recognized the role of, I don't think it's common reading, but if you've read it, Harvard and Reuters put out a report on the influence of news influencers, and the influence, just the general shift in kind of media consumption and media creators. And then Catherine Leavitt on the 28th of Jan openly recognizes news influencers and content creators. And in actual fact, puts them next to legacy media and actually gives them the front row in the William S. Brady room, right? So they get the front row and they get the first question. So all of a sudden, Trump just doesn't only come in, but he disrupts how the world sees the power of news influencers and influencers. I'm just thinking from an institutional perspective, an organization like the Loeries have been around for so long. How do you kind of, on the seas of creativity change at the moment with kind of all the rules being broken, how do you see that in terms of, look at what Mr. Beast has done with Feastables. He doesn't follow the traditional brand route. You now have both Elon, not only at X in his business, get rid of comms and brands in the traditional sense. He's now brought that ideology into the White House. How do you navigate the shifting change of creativity and how people consume with products and how products launch and how they engage it? If you think of what the biggest jerky brand in the world is not the traditional jerky brands we know, but it's an influencer who does a meat platform and is now selling jerky chicken on the side. How do you kind of see that navigating landscape?
Yeah, I think in the end of the day, one of the things you have to look at is that brands always want to meet with the minds of consumers. There needs to be a meeting of minds. And that process of meeting of minds happens in a number of different ways. You have agencies, you have influencers, and you tend to find that most influencers are working with agencies these days. It's not like a brand is going, hey, I want to work with that influencer. There's an agency that's an influencer agency, and the brand goes, who can we find is the right person in it? So you tend to find that the landscape is changing, but the key overall human experience of the meeting of minds between the consumer who purchases the brand and the brand is still happening in place.
I love what you're saying, because you're saying even though it changes, it still stays the same. Is that what you're saying?
It still stays the same. It hasn't changed. I mean, think about this. I mean, I'll tell you, I studied archaeology, classical archaeology, and you look at the times and you look at Pompeii and places like this.
Yeah.
There were bakers and all of stuff, and they still had communication out trying to get people to come and purchase their product and stuff like that. Meeting of minds between a brand or the supplier and the consumer. That kind of basic human aspect has not changed.
Will not change.
It just diversifies.
Okay.
It's in a constant state of flux.
It's
and
the LP and the CD. It's the CD and downloads.
Yeah. But it's still the same thing. It's in the end of the day, all it really is there's a consumer who wants to listen to music and there's an artist who wants somebody to listen to their music. The method in which that's delivered is going to continuously change. That's the innovation where the Loeries actually sits in. So the Loeries as an organization is an innovation-based organization. We play in that space of being able to uncover what is the innovation that is allowing that meeting of minds between the brand and the consumer.
Do you think as leadership now that you are sitting in a chair in a very different point in time to your predecessor, where if you consider what your predecessor gone through and some of the changes, and you're considering that you're in the chair now with AI game changing at X times 10 in a period of instead of it being decades, we're talking literally years, months.
Yeah.
DeepSeek wasn't around
Yep.
a year ago. It
wasn't around a month ago.
It wasn't a month ago. It
Yeah.
disrupted the stock exchanges. It has made us fundamentally question large language modeling. Do you think that you are probably sitting, and I don't want to make it sound like it's Armageddon, but do you think you're sitting in the chair at the moment where the Loeries itself has to inwardly almost think ahead to say, we kind of have to survive these waters because we have to be relevant in 4, 5, 6, 7 years? Or how do you see? Do you think it's still the same? You'll be able to, if you continue doing what you're doing, you'll be able to grow as the industry changes? Or do you think as leadership, you kind of have to be in the kitchen and have to watch the ingredients carefully because you don't know what they're going to end up being concocting in like 6 months from now?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Loeries is based on sound strategy, first and foremost. So
but strategies change, right?
Strategies evolve. But I mean, essentially, in the key there is if you're looking at it and you're going, what is our key strategy? Why do we exist? What is our purpose as an organization? Our purpose is to ensure a strong and healthy brand communications industry. So ensuring that connection, again, meeting of minds between brands and consumers. Trade in that kind of sense is always going to happen. We're always going to need to buy stuff. We need to fuel our lives, and brands are going to be there to supply us with products that we need. And essentially, our strategy as Loeries to ensure is that in that process, as that change happens, that we're continuously there and supporting it. Now, we do evolve when we change. So if we look at our categories, we'll add AI as a category. So we have artificial intelligence as a category. We have the rise of influencers. So we have very specific influencer categories in these kind of spaces itself. So we're continuously evolving, looking at the landscape, and then evolving our categories as needed. Some fall away, some come through, but ultimately, end of the day, it's still about that connection between brand and consumer in that mindset. How is that happening? How is the environment changing? And ensuring that we're reflective of the market and the industry.
As we wrap up, I want to talk to you about circle of influence. As the Loeries, do you think now in 2025, its circle of influence is bigger or less than it was, let's say, 10, 15 years ago? Because unfortunately for me, and I get to engage with lots of people, there are different ideas in terms of what influence is in the AI world. And also with so many people having access to so many things now, where if you think about my time when I was 20, you would need a full suite of editors. With Apple Macs, now you just need your phone, right? So how do you see the circle of influence for the Loeries, let's say now versus the next 2 years, next 4 years, next 5 years?
Well, it's significantly bigger than it was in the past, and it's escalating and growing continuously. And we look at metrics, so we don't just say this. We look at the number of entries that are coming in. We look at the number of interests from different countries, the number of countries entering into
Yeah,
Loeries.
because you're in the Middle East and all those places now.
Yeah, we have over 25 countries entering to the Loeries every single year. Countries, not just in Africa, Middle East, but we have entries coming in from the USA, from across Europe, such as UK, Netherlands, places like that itself. So the influence of the Loeries and its ability to impact change in the brand communications industry across Africa and the Middle East is significantly greater. And because the runway is so long and there's so many further opportunities, I think what you're going to see is that the Loeries continues to grow and escalate and then increase its influence long after I've even left this organization.
Final question. And obviously this is not an exit interview. I'm just asking if it's the one thing that you think you would have been able to innovate within the structures of the Loeries or be able to innovate public facing. What's the one thing you want people to think about Preetesh in terms of he was there, he was measured, he was counted, and he was able to affect this change? I know we didn't talk about young people, we didn't talk about opening up the Loeries for different race groups, more diversity, but just kind of that thing that you believe it's your kind of secret spice.
Yeah, I think the secret is, like I said, as we started at the beginning, it's that, excuse me, I want people to know that when Preetesh was there, he gave the Loeries back to everyone. And therefore, you tend to find there's greater engagement, more entries, and more interest in the Loeries is because greater ownership of this organization for consumers, for the agencies and people who create the ads, and for the brands who are out there fueling this industry.
I love that, sir. I love it. We appreciate your time. Thank you for coming to have a chat to us. Yeah, I feel like I learn so much when we engage with people, and I think our audiences learn as well. Now the idea of when you watch the Loeries or you hear the Loeries, you get that sense of meaning that this is really what you're trying to do, is to make it more inclusive, is to open up the industry. And you know the beautiful thing about our audience, you've got moms, dads, they're driving, they're on their way to work. Sometimes there's a kid in the home who wants to be a creative, and often they struggle to understand, especially if mom and dad are in kind of really tactile jobs, why this boy or girl wants to be a creative.
Yeah. So if I can tell them, go to loeries.com, Loeries.com, go watch the work. If you go and see the work that's winning and the work that's doing great, you'll understand why kids want to get into the creative space, because you'll be able to access and see the stuff that's actually making an impact on the lives of people. So go to loeries.com, Loeries.com.
From your lips to God ears, we appreciate you. We appreciate the Loeries. When we come back, we'll have a chat to Comvault and the work that they're doing in communities.